Hello there and welcome to this webinar. This webinar was put together so that you would be able to confidently answer assessment task 2.3 in the assessment cluster workbook. So it's been our absolute pleasure and honor to have you as part of the face-to-face course or as even part of the distance course. And we really hope that up till now you've had all your questions answered and everything's made sense for you so far. The purpose of this webinar is to walk you through assessment task 2.3 and to really make sure that you know that you're on the right track and just to give you some extra support in this particular task. If you have any questions at all after still watching this webinar, please give us a call and we'll be more than happy to give you some extra individualized support. However, before we go into the actual assessment task itself, I just wanted to do a quick overview of essentially what is RPL. And essentially a bigger picture overview of the assessment task itself so that you know how it fits into the grander scheme of what you may do as an assessor. Okay, so let's jump right into it. Okay, and I hope that you've got your notepad and pen ready to take some great notes as we go through this content. Okay, so as you would know, in the vet sector, there's two types of assessment. There's training and assessment, otherwise known as TAE. Also, there is RPL, and as many of you would know, that stands for Recognised Prior Learning, okay, RPL. And as part of being a trainer and assessor in the vet sector, you may actually be required to put together a basic RPL kit or even use an existing RPL kit that may be in your RTO. Okay, so it's very important that you understand the process that you go through in order to build an RPL kit so that you could one day sit down with a candidate and help them through that process. Now, RPL is not better or it's not worse than training and assessment, it's just different. Okay, there's often some misperceptions that RPL is easier. Now, it certainly may be easier for some people in some circumstances that have all the evidence available. However, sometimes just doing the training and the assessment itself can be a lot easier than going through the process of trying to find all the evidence to meet all the criteria. Okay, everybody's different. Everybody has different circumstances and contexts which they are working in. So we just need to be aware that there's two types of assessment, and fundamentally, at the end of the day, all the criteria from the unit still must be met. There's just two different avenues that we can meet it through. Okay, so there's one possible RPL process, and I'll just describe it to you on the screen here. So you may have an application that a candidate puts in, then they may actually be interviewed, and evidence may be reviewed, and then they may actually enroll and pay. Okay, once that happens, they then may be observed in the workplace. Because what we need to appreciate is that RPL, it's not just knowledge, it's also skills as well. So there's often times where an RPL assessor will go out to a workplace and actually observe a candidate performing some actions, okay? So RPL, it's not just about submitting evidence all the time. For many practical items, it will also include the assessor actually visiting a workplace. Okay. Now, then if there are any gaps, then gap training may be provided. And then eventually, if if all the gaps are filled, so to speak, and all the evidence has been established and identified and can be provided, then the qualification may be issued. Okay. Another alternative to that could be a candidate will fill out a self-assessment checklist just to make sure that they've got everything required, and it's very succinct and powerful process if the candidate actually does that self-assessment. Then if that self-assessment, both the candidate and the RTO believe that the self-assessment has been answered honestly, then the candidate will enroll and pay. They will then submit the required evidence. The evidence is then reviewed. And then a competency interview is often set up, okay? And what will happen in that interview is that candidates will often be asked a lot of questions in relation to that evidence that's been provided, and also asked further questions based on remaining items in the unit of competency, okay? Then number 6 there, that a observation may take place in the workplace if required. Not always required, but sometimes it is. Okay. Number 7, then feedback is provided and gap training may be provided if gaps are identified. And if all criteria are met, then the certificate is issued, as I said. Okay. Now, what we need to appreciate though is that there is also the concept of credit transfer. So we just need to be aware of what credit transfer is. And the difference between RPL and credit transfer is that basically credit transfer is when you already have the unit of competency. So for example, at another course, at another RTO, you may have already completed one of the units that you're going to study in the future. So essentially, maybe you've covered, for example, the unit BSB, let's say CMM, make a presentation. All right, so you've already covered that at a different RTO in a different course, and then maybe you go on to study a different course, and maybe that existing unit that you've already got is included in the future course. In that case, you would get credit transfer for that unit. Okay, now that is simply the case of providing a statement of attainment or the existing certificate to the new RTO and saying, I've already got this unit, could you please provide me credit transfer? Okay, now they may still charge you for that, there may still be fees and different things. However, a key difference with credit transfer and RPL is RPL, you're required to provide evidence. In the case of credit transfer, you provide the previous existing certificate, so to speak. Okay, now, there are a number of, I guess, ways that you could substantiate your skills and knowledge in the area of or the approach of RPL. Okay, and fundamentally, you need to provide evidence. So if somebody comes to you and says, I want RPL for XYZ unit, well, the first thing that you're going to say to them is, please prove it to me. Okay, please prove it to me. And it's the candidate's responsibility to be able to prove to you that they have the skills and knowledge and that they can do the task and have done it previously. Okay, so it's have done it previously and can do it now. And they're going to substantiate that by providing evidence. Okay, now there's 3 different types of evidence that they may provide. So they may provide direct evidence. Okay, they may provide indirect evidence or supplementary evidence. Okay, now direct evidence is when you as the trainer actually watch them do it. Okay, so for example, if you actually went to a work site and watched them hammering in a nail, that would be a type of direct evidence. Okay, now if you watched a video of them hammering a nail, that would also be direct evidence. Okay, now indirect evidence would be, for example, if they showed you some pictures of them doing it, that may be indirect evidence. Okay, and ultimately it is, can the trainer observe it, and ideally in real time. Okay, now other types of indirect evidence may be, so we've got photos, maybe you've got reports. Okay, or we've got let's see, what else? Anything that definitely has the candidate's name associated to it, reports, things like that, okay? Or maybe even pictures of the house that's being built, all right? Now, third, we've got supplementary evidence. Now, that essentially would be when someone else says that they did it, okay? E.g. a third-party report or a position description or a letter from a supervisor or something like that. Okay, so direct evidence is when the trainer themselves, or the assessor, can actually watch the person do it. Okay, now indirect evidence is when we see results of it. And third, supplementary evidence is when we hear from someone else that that person has done it. Okay, so as we are an RPL assessor and going through the process of RPLing someone, we want to see as much direct evidence as we can. And as much indirect evidence is okay as well. However, most commonly, people will want to give you a lot of supplementary evidence. Okay, and in terms of weighting, supplementary evidence is probably the least substantial or the least convincing, so to speak. We want to really gather lots of direct and indirect evidence. Okay, now, as we know, in the vet sector, there's two possible results: there's satisfactory or not yet satisfactory. Then we've got competent, or the other one is not yet competent. Okay. And we've got the number 100% there because we want to remind ourselves that in order for a candidate or for a student to be competent, they have to get 100%. Okay, so how do we know it is good evidence? Okay, well, in order to know that it's actually good evidence, there's 4 criteria that the evidence must meet. Okay, the evidence must be valid, it must be authentic, it must be current, so up to date, and there must be enough of it for us to actually be able to make a decision. Okay, so when we're looking at a piece of evidence, say it is a PowerPoint presentation. Okay, so let's think of the unit make a presentation. Okay, and in the unit, maybe it asks for copies of presentations that have been done previously. Okay, so valid. Okay, well, in the unit, does it say he wants a PowerPoint presentation specifically, or does it talk about a presentation in Keynote? Okay, or does it actually specify what the presentation should look like? Okay, so in order for the presentation to be valid, it must be meeting the unit requirements. Okay, authentic. Does it actually have the name of the candidate as the author and creator of the PowerPoint presentation? Okay, current. Is the PowerPoint presentation something that was delivered within the last 2 years? Okay, generally RPL assessors like to see evidence that's from within the last 6 months to 2 years, but anything over 2 years is sometimes questionable. Okay, sufficient. In the unit of competency, does it ask for 1 presentation or 2 presentations? Okay, and if it asks for 2 and you've only been given 1, well, then obviously the evidence is not going to be sufficient. Okay, so here is a list of possible workplace documents that you may receive as an RPL assessor for somebody to prove that they are competent in that unit, so to speak. Okay, so a candidate may give you photos of them doing something, manuals that they have followed, policy and procedure documents that they've followed, reports that they've written, attendance registers for meetings or briefings or different things, emails between them and stakeholders, a resume, a position description, or the actual unit requirements. So maybe in the unit that they're going RPL for, it could be the unit, for example, organize a meeting. Okay, so maybe they give you copies of a meeting agenda. Maybe they give you a copy of meeting minutes that they actually created. Okay, maybe say it was the unit, let's pick another one, organizing schedules. Okay, well, maybe as part of that unit, they actually need to, they provide you with examples of schedules they've actually created for other people. Okay, so depending on the unit, that is really going to drive and determine what kind of evidence they're going to give you. Okay, so how do we ascertain that? Well, we're going to, not yet, no, we're actually going to go through the assessment task itself, and I'm going to walk you through how you would actually find and determine what you would actually look for. All right, so as we said, all the evidence that's given must be valid, authentic, current, and sufficient. So in real life terms, that means it can be proven to be the CAM's own materials. Okay, there's enough of it, it's up to date, and it meets the unit criteria. Okay, so now I just want to share with you some simple, typical questions that we may use in a competency conversation, aka an interview, so to speak, because normally with any unit of competency, you're going to have a competency interview to make sure that the candidate has the underlying or underpinning knowledge, so to speak, as they perform those tasks in their workplace. Okay, so questions and question styles that we can often lead with could be things like, tell me about your experience with, okay? When was the last time you, XYZ, and what happened? Number 3, how would you? Number 4, what is your process for? Number 5, why is it important to? Okay. Number 6, if the following happened, what would you do? Okay, and hopefully as you read through those questions, you can see that a lot of those questions are process questions. They are not closed questions such as yes or no. Some of the mistakes that RPL assessors can fall into is creating questions that really don't give us much of a picture about the person's real skills and knowledge. Okay, so a question like that might be saying, is privacy important in your job? Okay, or is safety important in your job? That's not really a great question because somebody can simply answer, yes, it is important in my job. Okay, and that really hasn't told us much about do they know what privacy is, how to apply it in their workplace, what can happen if things go wrong. Right? So it's really important that we create process-orientated questions. Another way to think about an RPL interview, so to speak, is maybe think about it as a job interview style of questions as well, okay? Now, as part of RPL evidence, you often get people submitting third-party reports, or you may even create a third-party report for a candidate to submit, okay? So when we're creating a third-party report, we typically use it for soft skills or things to be observed in a particular environmental context. Now, a third-party report can often be used to cover off skills and actions, such as the supervisor writing, I have seen the candidate attend a fire evacuation. Okay, that's a very common one. I have seen the candidate interacting with customers in a polite and friendly manner. Okay, whatever the skill or action might be. Okay, on the knowledge side of things, we might write something like, I have seen the candidate demonstrate knowledge of conflict resolution strategies when interacting with customers. Okay, so a third-party report can be used to verify that a supervisor has seen someone do something or has demonstrated knowledge of doing something, okay, or how to do something, okay. So that is the end of the, I guess, base knowledge, so to speak. And what we'll do now is we'll go through the actual assessment task itself. Okay, and just bear with me as we bring that up. All right, so hopefully you can now see my screen. And as you would know, okay, so we have the scenario, if I can just scroll up. So we've got the scenario where we are dealing with the unit, participate in safe work practices, okay? Participate in safe work practices. Now, if we scroll up, we have the assessment plan, which we'll go through in just a moment, okay? But we've got the scenario here. So you've been given the task of conducting inductions for all new staff in the organisation who have existing skills and knowledge in workplace health and safety. You need to develop an assessment tool to address this target group, which focuses on skills assessment pathway, RPL, okay? So we're assuming that we're gonna create some RPL assessments for these candidates that work at this coffee shop called Coffeeholics, okay? So I will quickly go through the assessment plan and then we'll look at creating the assessments themselves, okay? So let's take a look. Purpose and aims of assessment and overall rationale. So in here, basically, we could write things like, the purpose of the assessment is to establish the skills and knowledge of the existing workforce who work at Coffeeholics in relation to working safely within a coffee shop environment or something to that effect. Okay, but as it says here, basically, why are you conducting the assessment? Okay, date assessment due. Well, you can put in the date that you're filling this out. That's totally fine. Or maybe you put in tomorrow's date or whenever it might be. Okay. Now, benchmark competency standard. Okay, that's just going to be the unit name, and that's going to be here. Okay, so that's the details there. So you can put in SITX WHS 001, participate in safe work practices. You can pop that in there. Okay, assessment context or place training will occur. Well, you can put in Coffeeholics because that's the name of the company and where all this is happening. Okay, assessment conditions, requirements. Okay, so where do we find that? Well, we can go to the unit itself. Okay, and if we scroll down, so we've actually got the assessment conditions right here. So we've got an industry workplace, simulated industry environment, and you've got all these details here. Okay, so you can pretty much write in that box up the top there, these details. So industry workplace, simulated, and all of that can go into this box up the top here. Okay, assessment conditions, you can put that in there. Okay. A target group to be assessed, well, you could simply say, all right, we've got a young, motivated workforce that works at the coffee shop, Coffeeholics, and that they have been there from an average of maybe 2 or 3 years, whatever you would like to do in terms of describing that target group, okay? But you want to put in 2 or 3 characteristics of this group, okay? Organizational arrangements for conducting assessment. Well, as you saw on that PowerPoint, well, probably you're going to need to, so the students are going to need to enroll the students. What else? The students are going to need to fill out a self-assessment. The students will need to submit their evidence. The assessor will need to be allocated time to review that evidence. And they will need to be issued certificates at the end of their assessment. Okay. So privacy and confidentiality, I would suggest that you write in something like only candidates will have access to their results and their evidence. Now, based on training package and workplace information provided, what contextualization needs opportunities available? So in there, you may put in all evidence provided will relate to the coffee shop, and evidence provided will be real world documents, so to speak, from the coffee shop environment. Okay? Basically, the question's asking you, how are you going to adjust your assessment to make it applicable to the workplace? Okay. Reasonable adjustment, provision for specialist support. In there, you don't have to put in anything. However, you could put, for example, that the interview will be done via telephone. Or you may say something like, that there will be a flexible schedule on when the interview is done to allow for the busy coffee shop operations, whatever it might be. Okay, so if you scroll down, identify WHS hazards, including assessed risks and control strategies. So in there, you may put in that the coffee shop will be inspected for hazards. Again, I'm just throwing ideas out there. You can use whatever wording you would like. However, you need to describe how safety will be looked after. So maybe the assessor is going out to the environment to watch them do some tasks, or maybe they're going to just go to the coffee shop and interview them. So in that case, obviously you'd want to give the assessor a bit of a safety induction, and you'd also want to make sure that the candidate has got their PPE on and everybody follows the safety plans in place, so to speak, and is aware of the safety concerns. Okay. However, it is a little bit unusual because it is a bit of an RPL situation. So the WHS side of things, it may simply be a case of briefing the assessor when they actually go out to the workplace. Okay, assessment methods. Well, In this case, in this scenario, we're actually going to use, so the first one, we're going to use workplace documents, okay? And then, excuse the spelling, workplace documents, okay? Assessment instruments, you would probably have a workplace documents list and list of criteria as well, right? Evidence and rationale, so you may have so list of workplace documents, okay. Markers guide, unit of competency, okay. All right, and then the next one we will have is a competency interview or competency conversation, so to speak. And then here we may put in interview questions. Then over here we may put in completed interview recording and list of interview answers. Okay. Over here we're going to put in a third-party report. Okay. Assessment instruments, third-party report. Okay, and then over here we will put signed third-party report from supervisor. Okay. All right, so we scroll down, materials required. Well, it's going to be anything that would be required in order to perform this RPL assessment. So we may have, let's go pen, paper, markers guide, let's see, available room to be able to conduct the interview. You may have a recording device. You may even stipulate that they have to have access documents and all of that, okay? So scrolling down, assess a name, put your first name and last name, administration process for assessments. Well, similar to before, we may say that the candidate must enroll, they must complete a self-assessment, they must pay the money, and they must be sent the RPL kit to fill out. They must send through their evidence and things like that. And the candidate's details must be entered into the USI database, those kind of things. Okay? Plan, review, and approval process. This is where you could say that the plan must be approved by the coffee shop manager. Okay, storage and retrieval process. So you may say that the assessments and all evidence must be stored on the RTO's secure server. Okay, version control to be applied. You could say 1.1. That's totally fine. Manager approval. You can get this signed by a hypothetical manager, so to speak. Okay. So if you scroll down, it's got a bit of the instructions for how to actually attack the scenario. Okay, but let's get into it. So what I like to do is take a big picture overview of the unit itself and make some preliminary judgments on how I think it would be best to gather the evidence. Okay, so in this case, we have 3 possible choices that you could choose from in ways to gather that evidence. Okay. So we have workplace documents, competency questions, or a third-party report. Okay. Now, as you go through each of these criteria, each of these performance criteria, each of these criteria you have to have evidence for. Okay. Now you may gather it through, as I said, workplace documents, competency questions, aka interview, or a third-party report. Now, you can't have a third-party report for everything. That's obviously not going to meet the criteria. And you wouldn't just have interview for everything, and you wouldn't just have workplace documents for everything, okay? Sometimes you may have multiple, for sure, okay? But just depending on the criteria, you may have multiples, for sure, okay? And you are going to find that some of these are going to lend themselves more towards one than the other. Okay, there used to be an idea that you would have to have 3 ways for everything. That's not necessarily the practice these days anymore. Okay, now, so we've got the performance criteria, of course, and we've got the knowledge evidence, and then we've got the performance evidence. Okay, then we've got the assessment conditions that we talked about before. Okay, so the process we're going to go through is, first of all, we're going to come up here and we're going to read through each of the items and decide how we are going to assess it. Okay, then what we're going to do is come down here and we're going to create our assessment plan for sure. Okay, and then we're going to come down and actually make the workplace document checklist, and then we're going to come down and we're going to create the interview questions. Okay, and then we're going to create the, scrolling down, the third party report. Okay, and we've got some mapping in there, mapping boxes for you to be able to do that. Okay, so let's come back and let's initiate the process. Okay, now feel free to watch this webinar a number of times if you ever get lost as we go through this. Okay, so coming up, okay, now I will say that as we go through this, there are a number of different ways to approach this activity and even RPL in general. So if you find that you are following through this and it doesn't make 100% sense, feel free to shift it, change it, whatever works for you. But at the end of the day, there are some fundamental things that we're trying to achieve. And the biggest thing we're trying to achieve is that all items in the unit are actually covered and there is enough evidence for proving that the candidate is competent, so to speak. Okay, so now let's go through it, and we've got 1.1 there, follow organizational health and safety procedures. Okay, so the question to ask ourselves is how or what kind of evidence would we want to be able to gather that somebody can follow organizational health and safety procedures? Okay, well, probably for that one, I'm going to put a tick or put an X in competency questions, aka interview, and third party report. Okay, that just makes the most sense to me. Okay, then we've got incorporate safe work practices into own workplace activities. Well, probably for that one, I'm going to go workplace documents and competency questions. Okay. Got follow safety directions of supervisors, managers, and workplace safety warning signs. Okay, well, that one I'm probably going to go interview and third party. Okay, using PPE and so personal protective equipment and clothing or designated uniform. Okay, for that one I might go workplace documents and maybe even let's say third party. Okay, again, these choices are arbitrary. It is whatever you think. Okay, now obviously there's going to be inherently, if it is going to be something that's more visible or something you can observe someone do, in this case it's going to probably be more something that's we'd have a workplace document around. Another way to describe this is a workplace evidence, so to speak. Okay. And we've talked about in that PowerPoint just now that that could be photos, it could be videos, it could be actual reports or things like that. Okay. Interview questions is interview, third party is when someone else says it. Okay. Now we've got, for example, let's go to the next one. 1.5, promptly report unsafe work practices, issues and breaches of health and safety and security procedures. So probably that one, I'd go workplace documents, maybe interview. Okay, so what we're actually doing is putting in ticks or crosses as we just do a preliminary, I guess, review, and we make some initial decisions. Identify and remove hazards from immediate workplace area. Again, I'll probably go workplace documents and interview there. Okay, recognize emergency and potential emergency situations. That one I may go interview and third party. Okay, now let's skip a few here, and hopefully that you're starting to understand the process that we're going through. You're going to obviously, for every criteria that we've got here, you're going to go through and tick the boxes as to how you're going to assess it. Okay. Let's see, 2.4, complete emergency incident reports accurately following organization procedures. Well, that one's a very clear workplace document. Okay. So you're going to go through each of these lines and decide how you're going to assess each of the items. Okay. Now, when it comes to the knowledge evidence, we will, as a matter of course, we will actually start to number these as well. So we'll go KE1, KE2, okay, KE3, KE3, etc., KE4, KE5, KE6, KE7, okay, KE7, KE8, KE9, okay, and then we've got KE10, okay, just waiting for my, yep, so KE11, KE12, KE13, KE14, KE15. Okay, so you're actually going to go through and number them, just like I've started to do there. All right, so once you've numbered them, then you're going to come across here and you're going to put in the ticks or the crosses just like we've been doing. So KE1, actions that must be adhered to in business, by business. Most of the KEs you're probably going to tick as interview questions and third party. All right. We find that most of the time KEs we're going to handle via interview questions and third party. Okay. Now we're going to scroll down. Performance evidence. Mostly performance evidence is going to be handled by workplace documents. Okay. And maybe sometimes you're going to have third party as well, but most of the time it's going to be documents, or we'd actually observe the candidate doing it. Okay. But in this case, it's going to be mostly hint, hint, nudge, nudge, third party. I'm sorry. It's going to be mostly workplace documents. Okay. So you would go ahead and tick this column here. All right. Assessment conditions, you're not going to worry too much. Okay. Now, once you've gone ahead and ticked how you're going to assess each item, that's our starting point. Okay. Now we're going to come down and actually make the assessments themselves. All right. So unit code and title. Well, we know that because that's the unit code and title there, SITX. Okay. Cool. Okay, so we'd put that information in there. Instructions to assessor could be, let's see, review the candidate's self-assessment checklist. It could be review candidates' assessment RPL evidence provided. It could be arrange a time for the competency interview. It could be review the third-party report to make sure that all documents are signed. Okay. Then it could be create an assessment report for your candidate and advise if gap training is required. Okay. So instructions to candidates coming down. This section, we could say complete your RPL self-assessment. Submit required evidence. It could be arrange a time for your interview and answer questions to the best of your ability. It could be get third-party reports signed by your supervisor. Okay, that should pretty much be all the instructions that the candidate needs. Coming down, assessment methods, as we've already discussed, it could be, will be, workplace documents. It could be the interview and third-party supervisor report. Okay, assessment conditions. In here, you'd probably want to put RPL context, and then you'd probably want to restate the assessment conditions that we've got here. Okay, and so, for example, assessment conditions will include an industry workplace, simulated industry environment, and then you would just relist this information here. Okay. Reasonable adjustment, you can simply say it is RPL context, so no reasonable adjustment will be required. Okay. Appeals policy, you could put in if the candidate has any concerns, objections to the assessment result, they are free to put in an assessment appeal via sending an email to the academic support manager, or just describe the process to put in an appeal. Okay. So WHS, you can once again, as we said before, this is an RPL situation, so the safety concerns will be handled by an inspection of the interview area. However, no other major safety hazards have been identified, or something to that wording. Essentially, how are we going to keep the assessment process as safe as possible? Okay, submitting your assessment, you could say assessment evidence must be submitted to the RTO via the following email address. And here are the contact details to do that. For any other evidence, it must be submitted directly to the assessor. Okay. Timeline for completion. You could say evidence for RPL must be submitted within 1 to 2 weeks. Okay, so you can specify the time frame. The interview, you could allow 1 to 2 hours for that. Competency interview for sure. Okay, recommended reading. You could say candidate is encouraged to review the staff handbook. Okay, for sure. Resources required. In there, you could say available room, voice recorder for the interview, what else? The marker's guide or the assessor guide for the RPL documents, those kind of things, okay? Evidence requirements, you could say signed third-party report, you could say what else? That the RPL evidence needs to be presented in an organized fashion, and each piece of evidence must be numbered and clearly have the candidate's name on it. Okay. To be deemed competent, you could say something like all evidence must meet the rules of evidence and must meet the marker's guide criteria. Okay. And you could also say that all answers within the competency interview must be answered to the requirements of the marker's guide and to the what else? Meet the rules of evidence, and the candidate must get 100% on that interview. Okay. Feedback. You could say that the candidate will receive a assessment report, and also the candidate will have an opportunity to provide the assessor with feedback as to how they found the assessment process as well. Okay. So scrolling down, we now have the workplace document checklist. Okay. So this is where we're now going to start creating the assessments themselves. Okay. So the first thing that we want to do is get into the habit of actually mapping and putting in the mapping first, and then we create the actual thing that we're looking for, so to speak. Okay, so if we go back up to the top here, okay, and we take a look at the mapping document, okay, so this is often called a mapping document or a matrix, so to speak. Okay, so we've got, let's imagine that let's imagine that we ticked or put a cross against workplace documents. Okay, so let's put a cross there, and we're going to come down and we're going to put, first of all, it's just a good habit to get into to start with the mapping first. All right, so we've got 1.3. Okay, and now if we go up to 1.3, we can see that 1.3 says, excuse all the scrolling, but it's just the way we need to do it, follow safety directions of supervisors, managers, and workplace safety warning signs. Okay, so workplace documents. Okay, so if we scroll down, we may put, okay, let's say photos of safety signs, and let's say WHS manual that is used in the workplace. Okay, so that's how we may cover off that criteria of 1.3. Okay, now let's scroll up and let's see. Okay, what else have we ticked or put a cross against next to workplace documents? Well, let's imagine that we put one there. All right, use personal protective equipment and clothing or designated uniform. Okay, so again, that one we could probably cover off with photos. Okay, so we go 1.4. Okay, scrolling down. Okay, scrolling down. In here, we're going to put in 1.4. All right, we're going to put photos of, excuse the spelling, of wearing PPE. Okay, so that is going to cover off that one. All right, now let's see, what else have we put a tick or a cross next to? Okay, and maybe we put a maybe we put a cross against 1.5, promptly report unsafe work practices. Okay, so that one probably reads to me like you could handle that with a hazard report form. Okay, so 1.5, 1.5 coming down. Okay, okay. So we can put hazard. Um, Okay, so hopefully this is starting to make sense as we are starting to think what kind of evidence that we could actually touch or review or look at that would show us that that candidate has actually done that task in the workplace previously. Okay, now as you can see, we've started to put the mapping in, okay, and we create our statements. But what we want to do is, as we're putting it in, can you see how we've got the mapping 1.3? Now that is actually covered off by number 1 there. So as we're building our assessment, we want to come back up here and we actually want to not just put ticks and crosses, but we actually want to put the numbers. All right, so this is handled by number 1, this is handled by number 2, this is handled by number 3. Okay, so hopefully that's making sense as we're going through it. Okay, now, for example, let's see if we scroll down. As we said, most of the performance evidence we're going to handle by workplace documents. So it says demonstrate the use of predetermined health and safety security procedures and safe work practices in work functions on at least 3 occasions. So in there, we would probably, it does say 3 occasions. So that we would, as we've said, we'd label it PE1. It's going to be PE2, PE3, 4, 5. Right. So all right, so that ends up being PE1. So in here we put a cross, okay? So if we come down, we'd also tackle the PEs, all right? So you may tackle that with PE1 over here, and you may put in, for example, maybe they have completed a safety inspection on the coffee shop, on the coffee machine itself. Okay, and that would be one instance, and then maybe another instance, another instance. Okay, so hopefully it's making sense that anything that you put a tick or a cross against up here in the unit matrix up here that we've got, okay, you're going to start to fill out the list of evidence that you would want for that item. Okay. Now, obviously, I can't do it for you and can't do it in real time, okay, because you've got to start to make some decisions for yourself as to how you would assess it, okay? Once you've done the workplace document checklist, okay, and feel free to, as you go through it, if you want to add extra lines, you can certainly do that. Maybe you add another couple lines if there's more that you've ticked or less that you've ticked for workplace documents, for sure. Okay, so you could add extra lines if you wanted to. Okay, and the other thing to keep in mind is that in these boxes you could have multiple. So you could have PE4, you could have PC 3.1. You know, you could certainly have multiples in that box. All right, but anything that you tick or cross in that matrix, you need to make sure that you've got evidence for. Okay, so now let me just erase that. All right, now we want to look at creating competency questions. All right, so let's go back and let's double check our mapping. All right, so let's just say that in the mapping, all right, so let's say in the mapping that we put a tick or a cross against follow organizational health and safety procedures. Let's say we tick that one, okay? So we've got 1.1, all right? So I'm gonna come down here and I'm gonna make a question, okay? So coming down, Okay, so coming into here, I'm going to put in the mapping, and it said follow safety. Forgotten what the criteria was. Let me go back up. Apologies for that. Okay, so it was follow organizational health and safety procedures. So a question that we could ask could be something like, tell me an example of how you follow organizational health and safety procedures. Or another one could be, tell me 3 examples of organizational health and safety procedures at the coffee shop. Or another one could be, why is it important to follow organizational health and safety procedures? Okay, so we're going to create a question for that, and we're going to pop it down there in the interview. And if you remember before, okay, so we put the mapping in there, 1.1. Then we're going to create the question, as I said. So why is it important to follow safety procedures, whatever our question is. And then because it's related to number 1 there, we're going to come back up here. Okay. And we're going to pop the question number itself into here. Okay, that way we're just going to be making sure that we know that we've covered off everything that we do and everything that we've ticked as a cross or a tick, whatever it might be, that we've covered it off. Okay, so as you go through this process, you're going to have not just ticks, but you're going to have the numbers in there as well. All right, so you make the question, so you put in the mapping, make the question, and then come back here and put in whatever number it is. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So now let's attack some of the KEs. So for example, KE1, actions that must be adhered to by a business. Okay, so KE1, as you're going through it down here, actions that must be adhered to for a business. Actions that must be adhered to for a business. All right, so maybe down here it's like KE1, actions that must be adhered to for a business. All right, so a question could be something like, what are, excuse the spelling again, what are 3 actions that a business must take to keep the operations safe for everyone? Okay. So simple question, and that's going to cover off KE1. Now that question may also cover off other things such as KE4, maybe cover off KE5. Okay, KE5. I'm not sure. I'm just letting you know that you can have multiple items in that box as well. Okay. Now you have to create. In this case, we've got 13 questions that you need to create. Okay. So you pop in the mapping. And you make your question, and then you need to go back and definitely pop in the box. Pop in the box up here what the actual question number is, just like we've started to do up here. Okay, so now let's take a look at the third party. Okay, so next one that we're making, so you go through, you make your workplace document checklist, you make your interview questions, okay, and then you have your interview questions, your competency questions. You make 13 in total. Okay, and then you scroll down, and then the third thing we're going to make is a third-party report. Okay, now the third-party report, again, just like before, the mapping. So mapping, we're going to put in whatever we've ticked or put across against up there in the unit, and then we're going to make some criteria. Okay, so let's go with 1.1. Let's just imagine that I ticked or put across against 1.1. Okay, so follow safety procedures. Let me just double check on what that wording is. Let me just quickly scroll up. Okay. All right, so follow organizational health and safety procedures. Okay, so let's imagine I put a tick there or a cross there. Okay, and let me just remember, follow organizational health and safety procedures. Okay. Now, if you were doing this in your own time, what we suggest that you is definitely take these pages out of the folder. That way, you don't need to be flipping pages back and forth. Okay. All right, so if we were coming down and we're making our third party report, so we could say something like, as the supervisor, I have seen the candidate follow safety procedures when cleaning the, excuse the spelling, cleaning the coffee machine, okay? And serving food, okay? Serving food, okay? So that would cover off 1.1. Okay, and we could create statements such as supervisor, I've seen the candidate be involved in a safety induction. I've seen the candidate follow safety procedures when mopping up a spill. I've seen the candidate put out the safety sign. Okay, I have seen the candidate fill out a safety report. Okay, whatever it might be. So just to recap on the process, you put in the map, so you look up the matrix there, check out what you put as a third party item, then you come in, put in the mapping, and then create your criteria. Okay, and then you go back and you put the number against the tick, and that way you're going to keep track of making sure that every single item in the unit has a piece of evidence against it. Okay. So once you have created your workplace document checklist and you create interview questions and you create your third-party report, what you're then going to do is actually sit down with the candidate and you're going to trial it, okay? So let's go back up here, and for the workplace documents, is coming, yep, up here. You're going to fill out the top part up here. And you're going to call it RTO. I think in the actual scenario, it's called Able Training Services. So put that in. Candidate name, you're going to put in the name of the person that you're going to trial this with. So this may actually be a classmate, it may be a colleague, it may be a family member, whoever it might be. Okay. Assessor name is your first name and last name. Competency standard is the unit that we've been working with here. Assessment date, you put in the date of the assessment, the trial, okay? Now, candidate name, what we suggest is you put in the name, but you also put in trial candidate, okay? That'll help you delineate when you're actually using this as a trial, okay? So you come down, and then when it gets to the competency question, what you're actually going to do is you're going to sit down with the candidate. So up here, basically you can just imagine that you've done it. So you can put a tick in each of the boxes that says evidence provided, okay? And then come down where it says competency questions, you actually sit down with a mock candidate, ask them the questions, okay? Ask them the questions, write down what they say. Ask the question, write down what they say. Ask the question, write down what they say, okay? And then you're going to, don't need to worry about the benchmarks being 100% here, okay? It's important to have them, okay? So for sure, as you go through and create your questions, you definitely want to write in the benchmarks as well. But just to recap, so we're going to sit down with our candidate, we're going to ask them the questions, and we're going to mark their answers for sure, okay? I'm going to scroll down, ask the questions, write down what they say, ask the questions, write down what they say, and then we're going to come down and we're going to sign it as the assessor, get them, put the date, get them to sign it, get them to put the date, give them some feedback. It is only trial feedback for sure, okay? Then we're going to give them a score, all right? We're going to come down to third-party report. Again, this is just a hypothetical, but we are going to fill it out. So RTO is going to be Able Training Services. Candidate name, trial candidate, put in their name. Assessor name is your first name and last name. Third-party name, you can leave that blank. Work relationship, you put coffee shop manager. Assessment date, put today's date or the date you're doing the assessment. Competency standard is the name of the unit, okay? Then you're going to go through and tick all the boxes, okay, as if you have done it. And then get the mock manager, supervisor to sign it, put the date, okay? Then once you've done that, you're going to get your mock candidate or your trial candidate to fill out these details on the process that they've just gone through. Okay, so put in the unit of competency, the tool instrument being analyzed. So for example, the workplace document checklist, the interview questions, and the third-party report. Okay, instrument designed by, okay, well, that's the creator, so that's you. Analysis completed by, well, that's going to be the name of your candidate and the reviewer. Okay, date of analysis, whatever day they're reviewing it. Okay. And what your reviewer is going to do is go through and answer these questions with yes or no, and they need to put in a comment as they go through it. Okay. So they just review it, yes or no, put in some comments there. Okay. And then what you're going to do is now you are going to do a self-review and design a reflection. Okay. You are now in this question being asked, what are 3 or 4 changes that you would make to the assessment? Okay. So maybe in the interview, there were 3 or 4 questions that you think could be rewritten or changed. Okay, so this is where you would note those question numbers that you're going to change. Okay, or maybe in a third-party report, maybe the reviewer said those statements didn't really make sense. So here, this is where you would make a note of that and say, change the statements for the third-party report. Okay, items number 3, 9, 12, 24 need to be changed. Okay. Then, so you've gathered all your changes that you're going to make, and yes, there have to be some changes. At least 3 changes is what we recommend. Okay. Once you've noted that, then you want to come down to this checklist, and this checklist is just like the others that you've had. Basically, what we're asking you to do is type up these pages, type up the pages that we've given you here. You need to type up the workplace document checklist, type up the interview questions, type up the third-party report, and you need to make those changes that you have identified. Okay, so you need to type them up, and you make changes, make them in green. And you also need to create a markers guide, and the markers guide will have the instructions, of course, and it will have the questions and the answer, benchmark answers, and you will then use those actual assessments on 5 individuals. All right, so you're going to sit down with 5 individuals and ask them those interview questions and as your mock candidates. Okay, so if we go through the process again, you are going to fill out the assessment plan. You are going to create the assessment instructions. You're going to create a workplace document checklist, an interview, and then the third-party report. Okay, once you've created them, then you're going to sit down with the candidate and trial it. Then you're going to get them to review it. Then you're going to do a self-review. Okay, then after that, you notice the changes that need to be made. Then you're going to type it up, and then you are going to conduct it with 5 people. Okay, so hopefully that entire process has made sense for you. Okay, and if you have any questions at all, feel free to rewatch this webinar a number of times. And if you still are not sure what to do, reach out, ask us questions. I'm more than happy to help out. And the other thing you can do is jump on one of our live Q&A webinars, and I'm more than happy to help you out in that context as well. So hopefully this webinar has been helpful, and you now feel even more confident to complete this task 2.3. So thank you so much for watching this webinar. If you have any questions at all, we are here to support you. Thank you.